first thing I noticed immediately, because it's right at the start here, is these shop windows. They actually are 3D a little bit because the window is transparent and then the backdrop moves a little bit as you go past it. As far as I can tell, it's a small arc behind the window which they put a texture on. So it looks a bit strange, but when you're passing by it quickly, of course it looks fine. All of the shop windows have different backgrounds and labels. Windows are actually transparent. Those are actually reflective windows. These signs are in German. If I remember correctly, the one on the right says entrance and the one on the left says exit. So over here, there's some more of those anonymous cars that we saw in Transylvania. They're everywhere. And also a garage over here. There's some more up ahead as well. And there's also a ramp going down. This one goes up. Oh no, that one goes down. And these ones over here go up. This skylight is really nice if you look at it from here. One thing I found interesting about this is you can't really see down, but during the cutscene for one of the tracks, it actually does show you up and down the spiral. When it's showing the spiral, one time it goes down and then the other time it goes up. When you're playing in multiplayer and it cycles through it twice. So these are probably just baked lights, or maybe textures on top. These light bars, they actually share one mesh for the light. The glow of the light, it looks like one glow shared between both of them, just to make it more efficient. There's a thing that devs usually do for high quality environments is that for non-moving objects, you can just calculate where the light is bouncing, so you can do ray tracing in advance and then display how that looked later without having to do it again. So it's a pretty common technique which works extremely well. Sometimes you can't tell the difference between a rendered environment and a game if it's done very well. You can see there's some water leaking over here. And this water is pretty interesting. It's similar to the waterfalls in some of the other maps. So I'll show this in Blender of how you can animate that. And then where the water flows out of the pipe, and you get to see the car from above inside the water. This could be a cool selfie spot. It's tricky to keep it not falling off and the camera in the correct orientation. Along the side, it looks like some electrical wiring. I've actually seen this in my university as well. We have a lot of exposed wiring in the ceiling that isn't covered by panels, and it looks a lot like this. There's a cage and then several wires running inside of it. Over here, I'm not sure what this is. It looks like the wall over here was broken and then the rubble was deposited over here. Not sure why they have searchlights on the rubble though. I always used to think that the train went into a solid barrier here, and then I came to inspect and actually no, there's a gap in the barrier. But then I looked closer and I saw, oh, the door is open. So before I was inspecting this on the other track, the other version that goes in the other direction. So the door was actually closed and I thought it looked like the train was just coming out of a solid wall. But over here now we can see the door actually does open and the train goes into there. So that's really interesting. There's actually another tunnel at the end. Yeah, so over here you can actually see they extended the train tunnel the train actually goes somewhere, and when you're waiting for it to come the other direction, the train will actually be waiting inside this tunnel until it starts moving. So the next thing I wanted to note was these plants under the magenta lights. I'm pretty sure the reason it's magenta is because that's the color that actual plant growing lights are in real life. Because the plant is green because green is the color it doesn't use and it reflects. So that pretty much leaves red and blue. So you put those together and you get magenta. I also wanted to note the awesome puddles again. The very reflective and wavy. This sign that's flashing Gameloft, and then next station, I think that's how you pronounce it, but I probably pronounced it wrong. The German actually just translates to next station. It's not very helpful. And then over there, maybe Schweizer Platz stands for Swiss place. Then up there on those signs, I wasn't able to translate the station names, so I think those are just names. The red text I think stands for emergency stop and emergency phone. The top one is emergency phone and the bottom is emergency stop. Another thing I noticed over here is that there's actually Z fighting between the glass on the elevator shaft and the back of the poster. That means they put it directly on top, and the rendering engine can't figure out which one's supposed to be on top because they're at the exact same spot. And that's also the case on the poster on this side and on pretty much all of the posters, which is interesting to notice because usually that doesn't happen. Usually they're pretty careful about that because you see it immediately when you place something like that. Another interesting detail for me was these hexagons. Might not look like much, but I was really fascinated by this because I can't tell if the hexagons are actual meshes or if they just wrote a shader to make it look like they're actual meshes, and that's just a displacement texture. Every individual thing is really as detailed as the technology allows. These graphics are not too much for a high-end PC, but these same graphics are able to run on mobile devices, so that's pretty impressive. I'm pretty sure it is an actual mesh because if you look over here, the orange hexagon is intersecting this a bit more than the blue one. And if it was just a shader, then it wouldn't be possible for any of this to be visible in front of the metal bar going along here. This area I found really interesting for the amount of detail it has. First of all, over here there's a bunch of crates. Not sure what those are for. Not sure who would access them or how either, but it is interesting. Then we also have some bars. It seems to have railings on it, so I guess service people can go there to service the light. The lights actually have a volumetric glow on them. So a volumetric glow is basically, it looks like there's dust and actual light bouncing off of the dust in the air. Another thing I just noticed is there's a post-processing volume here. So basically what that means is it's a volume inside of space where the filters applied to the camera change a little bit. So when I'm parked right here, it looks a little bit darker because we were just inside the subway station where it was a lot brighter, so the camera exposure could be darker. But then if you move into this darker area, the camera suddenly gets a bit brighter, and there's a clear border right here. So this is a post-processing volume, which is used in games to change the camera and how it looks when you move into different environments. For example, if you go underwater, then the post-processing might make things blue and different, add vignette. I think they might also use it in some of the tunnels. So another thing I noticed about the tunnel that I didn't when going quickly through it was these blue lights on the side. So this tunnel also has some sort of support structure above it. There's some nice lighting along here. It's very interesting that you can see this arrow from both sides. Usually what they do is make meshes visible from only one side. So if you see it from the back, then it won't show up at all. By doing this, they essentially have the number of triangles they have to render, so it's very efficient. So I'm kind of surprised that they decided to show the back faces of these moving arrows. So another interesting thing I noticed was all of the graffiti around here. There's a lot of it. It's interesting that a lot of the graffiti references Asphalt 8, which means that the people inhabiting this world either somehow know about Asphalt 8. So maybe it's a very popular racing event that happens around the world. This is probably my favorite section of the map, just because of the amount of detail there is. So first of all, the most obvious thing is the fans. They're casting some interesting light rays from above. These effects are usually pretty difficult to implement correctly, but the way they did it here is, I think they have a small mesh going down the side of each fan, similar to how the headlights on the cars actually work, and the same way that the rectangular lights on the spiral roof were. So something similar to that is what I think they used here. We also have some graffiti over here. And the thing that really amazed me is these specks of dust floating around. As you move, you can see that they're actually in physical space. So when you go past them, they move past the car like they're staying in place. This was the most impressive effect for me. I can't tell if they're particles or if they placed the dots on a plane and have an animation, or if it's a shader. Whatever it is, it's a really good effect. These little areas seem to be scattered around the whole tunnel. And as far as I can tell, this is an electrical box. It has a danger sign on it. So I assume that's high voltage, but it's too low resolution to read, unfortunately. How do the people who live in this world know about Gameloft? Do they know they're living in a simulation? Also, this tunnel says 13, and pretty sure if you go to the other end, it also, the closed tunnel door also says 13 on it. There also seems to be another train tunnel on this side, but can't really see it. Further up ahead in the map, you will be able to see a train passing though, so I think it goes through there. But you're never able to see the train in here as far as I can tell. Yeah, there we go. So that train is probably passing through the tunnel over there, the other place. These indicators above don't seem to do much good. Let's just take the light on the right, for example. This says you can go, and this track keeps going, and then this light tells you that you have to stop or not go, but there's no fork to take the other route, and so you have no choice but to go through the X. And then there's more lights that say you can go. So I don't know if they do anything. Looks like another electrical box up there. The other thing I wanted to show is there's a pipe down here in a big service area. I was worried a bit about the safety of this. The load on the tracks would compress the ground and cause it to squish outwards, so that is extremely dangerous. There's a very extremely thin piece of what looks like gravel supporting the train tracks above this tunnel, and that tunnel goes to the other side and it's the same thing. So these train tracks have very little to support them. Doesn't seem very safe. But you can see there's a door down here to go into the service tunnel. These lights also have what looks like volumetric lighting. The interesting thing about this is if you look at it from head on, you can't see anything. But if you go to the side, then you start to see it. Just two triangles and a texture on it, and then you can get this kind of effect. And it looks very convincing. For real-time volumetrics, this is an incredibly powerful technique, and it's used all over the place. I wanted to check the engine noise. I'm pretty sure it's constantly accelerating. Okay, that's the end of that test. As far as I can tell, it sounds like it's constantly accelerating, even though it's at a constant speed. Yeah, so this looks like a texture, but this one over here looks like they actually have particles that are moving. And the telltale sign for that is where the lines where the particle meet the opaque mesh. Makes it really easy to tell that there's a plane intersecting the mesh and moving along it. This can be solved actually by using something called a depth texture, which they can compare against and set the transparency of the particle based on how close it is to touching something else. So if it's touching something, if the distance is really tiny, it's completely transparent, and as it increases, it gains back visibility slowly, and that's a really good way to make particles look a lot better, but it's also extremely expensive. So it makes total sense that they didn't use it here. It would look a lot better, but you barely see those. I'm also not sure why this sign points to... So it's slanting downwards to the left, so that says that it's safe to go left. But left is towards where the trains are. So I would not recommend cars to go that way. The tunnel fans are a legitimate thing. They're used to provide ventilation to the tunnel. So that's for multiple reasons. One is to prevent toxic gas buildup. It also removes heat from the tunnel for structural integrity, and also in case of a fire, if people are trapped in the tunnel, the smoke suffocation will kill the people before the fire. So you need good ventilation to blow that out immediately. A lot of tunnels actually have turbine engines in the ceiling for that exact purpose. I also found this random dumpster on the side of the road. What is that for? How did it get here, and who uses it? There's a high voltage cabinet over here. It's interesting that this is in English while everything else was in German. I was also interested in looking at these trains. They seem to have a bit less work put into them compared to the shops. These images are repeating. So as far as I can tell, every train carriage is identical to the one before it. Different train carriages aren't really a detail you need, so That saves a lot of loading time. You load one train carriage and then you can build every single train with the exact same carriages. There's also a train conductor staring happily out the side window instead of ahead, which explains why the train never even honks at oncoming cars. Another thing you might have noticed is that there's another track on the other side. If you come to here, you can actually see all the way down the tunnel, which is a lot better than the Transylvania tunnel. They even have nice lights in there, which is a very nice detail. I have a minor complaint about the benches though. The texture they chose to use on this is very simple. They made circular holes, which in real life would make the mesh very weak, and it would also be a lot more expensive to manufacture a mesh like that. So I think it would have been better if they used just a square instead of a circle, and it would still tile the same way, but it would look a lot more realistic, and it would probably make a better bench in real life and in the game. We have some turnstiles here, which is confusing because you can drive a whole car between the turnstiles. It won't keep any people out for sure. They don't have any barriers to prevent people from going around them. I'm not sure what these green doors are for. Maybe they're emergency exits? There's some more elevator shafts right here, which match the elevator shafts that go down onto the subway station. Also, that small security camera is a very nice touch. Another thing I noticed is that these stairs are curved. This makes sense for cars, but if you're walking upstairs, this gentle curve and this gradual change in the length of the steps is very annoying to walk up. This makes for another great selfie spot. Everything else in the city is in German. The stations were in German, but the construction sign is in English. I think this is probably because they just had to use the asset used on all of the other maps, but it is still rather strange. There's a truck over here. It's extremely dark. It looks pretty interesting. I'm surprised they made it so dark and hard to see. And if we look through this grate, you can see some more stuff, more construction beyond. They have some more shops, and these are also in English, 50% extra. Another interesting effect I wanted to note is transparency depth sorting. So you might notice the metal mesh is appearing on top of the trees. The reason this is happening is because one of the cheapest ways to render objects, which is used by most things these days, is called rasterizing. The idea behind this is that you have triangles, and then with a lot of math, you can calculate where those triangles show up, and then you can add lighting and interesting things. One of the main difficulties with rasterizing is sorting the depth of objects. For example, if you have two triangles intersecting each other, if you don't depth sort them, then one triangle is going to be on top of the other and you won't be able to see the intersection. When they are sorted correctly, then you can see exactly where the triangles meet and where the triangle is in front of the other in 3D space and so on. This is pretty much always done for opaque objects, and this is rendered to the screen. With rasterizing, if something is rendered, it's drawn to the screen. If another thing comes on top of it, if it's in front, it will be rendered on top of that and the old thing will be deleted. If it's behind, then the renderer won't bother rendering it because it won't be seen and the old color stays. Depth sorting is done for all opaque objects. So opaque objects can be rendered in any order using these rules. The problem with transparency though is that transparent objects look different based on which order they're put in. But GPUs like processing everything all together, and it's very inefficient to sort transparent objects. So the solution to this in most game engines is the very lazy solution of just not sorting transparent objects. This is usually the solution that is used because transparent depth sorting is very expensive, which is why you see the metal structure of the advertisement drawn on top of the leaves. Also, the balcony window has the same issue because it is also transparent. Transparent objects are rendered on top of after opaque objects, so transparent objects can seem perfectly fine with opaque objects showing through them, but when transparent objects interact with each other, the problems become quite apparent. Again, we have some nice foliage around here. An interesting thing I noticed here is that these hedges are rendered as opaque objects. In the Azure Coast map, the hedges are actually transparent. I thought it was interesting that the hedges are not the same between maps. There's a nice fountain over here. This would be rendered the same way as the leaking pipe and the waterfalls. I found it pretty interesting that over here there's a road that leads off to the side. It seems to go over the bridge over there. Over here we have a bunch more construction equipment. These seem to be barrels of oil from Dubai. I'm not sure what these are. I find it really interesting that these crates break apart when you hit them. It's a small detail and not too tricky to do, but it adds a lot to the game. There's a bus stop here you can use to practice your Asphalt 8 parallel parking skills. I found it very interesting that you can see the scaffolding of the construction from here, which is something you don't really notice much. It seems to be part extending the cinema or the mall, or maybe it's a mall that it's connected to because there are a lot of other shops on the other side. And back up a bit, you can see there's a bunch of movie posters. There's also 4 different colored Gameloft flags. The waving animation is very nicely done. I'd like to appreciate the detail on these benches. Very nicely made. There seems to be some sort of open area, and there's a statue in the middle of it. When I did some research to try to find the statue, I only found one result that was posed in the same way, so I'm not sure if it's actually there or not. There's also a very long driveway over here, which actually, I think that's not a driveway, that's just a road going through a tunnel. That's probably the building behind it. So I think that's just a road going through. Over here there's just another street that goes somewhere, but there's not much detail there. It is interesting to look at the individual houses though. For example, this door is extremely detailed, and the individual columns as well. This skylight is very nice because you're actually able to see faraway buildings through it. In my opinion, Munich Subway has some of the most interesting visual effects of all the maps, though I may find others in the future that are even more interesting. That's all for this episode. Thank you everyone for watching. If I missed anything, please make sure to leave a comment describing it so that I can include it in a future episode where I go over things I might have missed in the main episodes. If you enjoyed this, please let the algorithm know. Thanks.